Welcome to the Lunch and Learn video series brought to you by the Gateway Down Syndrome Association. Today we welcome Leanna Saunders from the St. Louis ARC. This video will present information that will assist families in assessing if or when they may need to seek counseling or therapy for their loved one with Down syndrome.
Hello, it's so fun to be back again. I'm Leanna. I work at the St. Louis ARC and run the therapy program. I've been working in disability services since 2016, where I worked at Giant Steps for 2.5 years as a para, and then worked as a social skills instructor. Ended up coming over to the ARC for my practicum, and then worked in various jobs with capable kids and families, a family navigator, and now therapist, where I was doing therapy kind of on the side throughout. And our therapy program has grown a lot, so really excited about that. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about making therapy accessible, specifically for people who have Down syndrome. These are some reasons people can come to counseling for: depression, anxiety, new life transitions, jobs, grief support, and relationships. So these are just a few things that people might come see me for. And typically, even if somebody might not be talking about a new life transition or needing support when starting a new job, I can see them when they come in and we'll talk about coping strategies. So even if they don't want to talk specifically about a subject, or it might be really hard to talk about that subject, especially grief, I try to work on coping strategies before that. And then how to know if your loved one would benefit from counseling. So this is a really cool thing that I love about my job, is just having the opportunity to talk about situations that may be difficult. So just having that time. A lot of times people who have disabilities are told, hey, no, that's not scary. Don't cry right now. Not given that autonomy to feel their emotions, especially like if they're in job training or in a day program. So really, I love my job because I can affirm those feelings and give them space to talk about that. And this time is specifically allocated for that. So I was working with somebody who has Down syndrome. She's an adult, and her mom passed away, and she's really struggling in her job and then her day program. And when we got her to come into counseling, she really got to talk about it and feel those emotions and kind of understand what grief was, and what happened, and also having that time just to talk about how she's feeling. I really like to focus on coping strategies as well. So even if somebody does not use words to communicate, I like to practice those. So it might be doing calming strategies. So they do a lot of those things in OT where I can teach people how to do deep pressure and putting their hands together for deep pressure so that they can use that as a tool for when they might be anxious later on. Deep breathing is really helpful. So we might practice that in the very beginning, especially if they don't want to talk about something that's really hard. I really like to give autonomy in my sessions. So during my intake, I typically tell people like, hey, if you're uncomfortable with any of these questions, you can tell me no. Like you can say, no, I don't want to answer that. A lot of people who have Down syndrome tend to be infantilized, and I try really hard to give them that autonomy in our sessions to say, hey, no, like I don't want to do that. And not just being told what to do. Because typically like in schools and growing up, that was pretty much the way it was. And counseling benefits continued. So with Down syndrome, emotions from an event are felt as if they've just happened. So a lot of times people who have Down syndrome, it's a lot like playing a movie or seeing the images. So someone who might have grief, trauma, stress, or excitement, when Mother's Day comes around and they had a loved one who passed away, they might feel that emotion as if it just happened. So a lot of times in my sessions, specifically for people who have Down syndrome, I'll do a lot of repetition. So that way we can think about those coping strategies when these emotions come up and feel like it's happening again. So I really try to focus on the moment something happened. So before that, we might lead up with calming our bodies, deep breathing exercises, deep pressure exercises. So I kind of have people copy me. So I'll do like give yourself a big hug, bring your shoulders up to your ears multiple times. So just really like kind of the like flexing all the muscles and getting loose. So that kind of helps people calm their body. And then we can talk about the traumatic event that happened, the stress that happened, and they're going into that event feeling not as anxious and a way to calm their body. So we might even do those throughout the session. That way we can have that repetition in place and coping in place for when we feel that heavy emotion again, like it just happened. So I always like to say repetition is key for coping strategies and processing. I'm also thinking about who is someone outside of therapy that they trust. So we go over that a lot too. That way, if they're feeling that again, they know who to reach out to. And then does the level of communication of the person with Down syndrome have an impact? So either using a communication device or might not use words to speak. So people who don't use words to speak or communicate with an AAC device, I like to use a lot of pictures and videos. A lot of times the pictures are really helpful. And on the next slide, I have a couple pictures of those. So we might play videos of a specific event that happened that has coping strategies or something that is similar to what they're experiencing. And then using pictures with consent, sometimes I'll use pictures from their day-to-day life. So that way we can show like, hey, this is where you go to work. These are the emotions we've talked about that might be happening at work, like stress, anxiety, and then assistance with learning calming strategies through modeling. So kind of like what I was saying before, the deep pressure modeling can be really, really helpful. Deep breathing modeling. And then the next one, I have a couple pictures of those. So feelings wheel is really nice. So sometimes or when somebody comes in for a session at first, I might either show them the I am feeling and with the faces on it or the feelings wheel. A lot of times occupational therapists or speech therapists might have already implemented those. So I really like to take what's already been implemented and use it in sessions for familiarity. That's really helpful with the repetition piece. So videos related to current life situations are really helpful. And then we can practice calming strategies before and after. I use a lot of narrative therapy for remembering schedules. This is also helpful with Down syndrome regression syndrome, which was really, I think, becoming prominent throughout COVID. A lot of people are seeing that in the mental health field, that with depression, a lot of times Down syndrome regression syndrome can really increase throughout that time. So isolation can be really hard. So typically narrative therapy, it can help with remembering our schedules, but also remembering the names of people, events that happened. So that repetition is going to be really important, where maybe I'll see someone once a week who has Down syndrome regression syndrome, and it's a whole family process where the parents or loved ones who they're staying with, caregivers, will email me saying, this is what we did this week. And I'll create a whole narrative therapy approach for that. So it might be, I'm saying like, Leanna went to walk her dogs in the morning. And then what happened after that? So then they would continue the sentence. So remembering events that happened, and then using personal photos, obviously with consent. That way we can get that memory going, and then also using coping strategies along that to help with that anxiety that comes along. Because a lot of times with Down syndrome, regression syndrome, it feels like there's a lot of rushing thoughts. So I'll try to practice a lot of those coping strategies in the very beginning and the middle and end so that we can feel calm while we're remembering what our schedules were and also events and our family members and friends. Um, I'll use games such as Uno to make it more comfortable for people to talk. Sometimes when you're sitting in chairs right across from each other, it can be really nerve-wracking. Um, and that's not fun for a lot of people. So I'll pull out Uno and it make it a little bit easier, especially if we do have the Down syndrome, regression syndrome, or anxiety in meeting new people. A lot of times when people get referred to me, they're used to getting referrals for being in trouble. So I usually try to make it a lot more fun and build that therapeutic rapport. And Uno's a great one to do that. Yeah, just making it fun and building that rapport in the beginning is really, really helpful for people. This is really great for grief. So a lot of times people might not know what death is. So I was working with an older woman who has Down syndrome, and it was the first time she's dealt with any type of grief. So typically I'll do a social story for that, and this might be something that they can take home. It kind of goes over what does dead mean? Like, what is it? People can die for different reasons, and it has pictures with it that can be really helpful. Typically, when I am working with somebody who has Down syndrome, I will use this throughout the session and every session. That way, there's an understanding of what's happening. I try to really respect their involvement in the loved one's passing. A lot of times people who have Down syndrome get left out of funerals and knowing what's going on. So I really try to respect that and give them choice and autonomy in understanding what's happened. So Winston's Wish is a really, really helpful website that has lots of different social stories, lots of different resources to help with that. And then this is another really helpful portion for grief, especially for people with Down syndrome. That repetition is really helpful. Winston's Wish, the social story that I just shared, is great because it does have pictures. So relating it to pictures is really helpful. This you can either write it, and I have some people who don't really want to write or draw, but I might say right now, like Leanna feels, so kind of using that narrative therapy approach, but with a grief sentence completion. So helping somebody know what to say or how to start the saying of how they feel, because that's really hard. That's a tough thing to know. And then identifying what might be the saddest thing right now. And also knowing it's okay to talk about the person that passed, because typically people with Down syndrome are told, no, it's fine, get over it, like it's okay, which isn't how we grieve. We want to give them autonomy to be able to talk about this. And then sometimes I'll send this home if the person wants me to. I'll send it home with them and they can utilize this and the social story on a regular basis. So that could even be multiple times a day or once a week. I've noticed whenever somebody originally is going through the grief process, having that repetition there right away is really helpful. Just because they are feeling the emotion like it just happened and it's so fresh. So really helping them process that in the moment. And it might seem boring because it's the same information over and over again, but that repetition, because the person who has Down syndrome is really feeling it like it just happened. So like even like a couple months out, that's going to be really hard. So I really try to set them up for success whenever they're going home and outside of therapy. So confidentiality is still very, very respected, even when people might have a power of attorney, a guardian. So I typically still need need a written consent to release information. The therapist is verbally directed to tell someone. The therapist determines you are in danger to self or others. The therapist has reasonable grounds to suspect abuse or neglect, or the therapist is ordered by a judge. So in my intakes, I typically explain this to people. It's really interesting because a lot of times it might be the first time they're having that autonomy and privacy. So they might really not want to not want to share things because that's hard. People like their privacy. And then other times as therapy continues, we can work with the family and they might say, hey, yeah, I want that support at home. I want my parents to come in and we can talk about that at the end. When we start getting that consent or them asking for a loved one to come into the session, it's typically the last like 10 to 20 minutes that we might talk about goals. So if it's a grief situation, I might explain the Winston's Wish social story, and I typically print all of that stuff off and I can send it home with them. So their loved ones can help them use it and process that information. So autonomy and confidentiality. So I kind of went over this already with that, but just respecting autonomy and decision making. Asking client if it's okay for others to be involved in the treatment. So one of the people that I worked with who has Down syndrome regression syndrome, the parents were able to come in and we practiced a lot of those calming strategies together so that they could help their son when they went home. And that's all just based on consent. Typically, like if the client consents, yes, we'll have the family come in. If not, then we'll practice it in here and hopefully it'll be practiced outside. So yeah, in my intake, I typically talk about if there's consent given the last 15 to 20 minutes of the session, family members and loved ones can come in to help support. Therapy can be for everyone. It's my mission to make therapy accessible. Coping strategies can be learned without talking. Images can help with learning and emotion. And giving support can go a long way. So even just 1 hour a week, 1 hour a month can be really helpful with someone learning coping strategies and going through a really hard time. And just having that affirmation of, hey, it's okay to be sad. This is understandable. And then these are some referrals for adults in the area for people who have experience in working with people with Down syndrome. Bridges Community Support Services, they're wonderful. They have an awesome team of people. Provident Counseling, they have like no wait list and they do wonderful wraparound services for a counselor and psychiatric resources. Scott Morrow, he actually used to work at the ARC. So he has a lot of experience and he has his own private practice. Family Resource Center. So this one is more in South City, but they work with families throughout any age range. They have a lot of experience. The Counseling Center, and then Creve Coeur Community Counseling. This one's really nice because it's very cost effective. They have a whole team of interns that are learning how to do therapy, and that is really nice price wise. So I think it's a little cheaper to go to one of the interns, but they're all really good. They have great supervisors and they're under supervision while they're in their practicum. And then referrals for children, Epworth Children and Family Services. They've been really, really wonderful with our families. Creve Coeur Community Counseling, so they also see children. Lee Bascom, so she has been providing therapy to children with Down syndrome for a very long time. She provides play therapy, which is so wonderful. And then Mercy Clinic Pediatrics. They have a really great team over there as well.
Thank you for your participation and for being part of a community that learns, connects, and grows together as we build brighter futures for individuals with Down syndrome and their families.